What's up, marketing legends, and welcome to another episode of the Growth Colony podcast. I'm producer Liza from Xgrowth to tell you that each episode we bring in B2B leaders to chat about how you can achieve those everyday wins in the marketing world. Whether you're new to the B2B game, working at a leadership level, or even just showing some interest, we know you'll love the episode. So wherever you are, get comfy and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Growth Colony, the podcast where we dive deep into B2B marketing, strategy, and leadership. I'm your host, Shaheen Hoda, and today we're tackling a topic that keeps every marketer and business leader on their toes: brand crisis. Joining me is Julia Casey, CMO of Packserv and a PhD researcher specializing in brand crises and online brand perception. Of course, they go hand in hand. She's spent years studying how consumers react when brands stumble, and more importantly, what companies should do next. In this episode, we'll explore how to manage a PR crisis, what brands often get wrong, and the key steps to turning disaster into opportunity. So if you've ever wondered how to protect your brand's reputation when things go south, this one's for you. Let's dive in. Julia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Shaheen. It's great to be here.
No, absolute pleasure. And I know this topic is dear and close to your heart, and it's a very fascinating topic. I'd love to maybe start with, let's get some definition in place, right? And I want to get your thought first on what does a brand crisis mean or look like today? What does that look like exactly?
Yeah, it's a great question. It happens when a brand's reputation is threatened, and it may be due to negative publicity, or if you've got a faulty product out there, or on the other hand, it might be due to an ethical issue. Now, we know that when it comes to things like ethical issues that put into question the values of the brand, they trigger strong emotional reactions. So very, very strong emotional reactions. But, all types of crises are of importance to brands. One of the things that's happened in recent years is that we've had this rise of online communities and social media. And so consumers are now all connecting on matters in relation to the brand. So it's no longer the brand telling everyone what to do or, how they're managing it. We've got the consumer to consumer element now. And so when a crisis occurs, and, in particular an ethical brand crisis, people don't necessarily know immediately, well, is the brand right or is the brand wrong? But they'll head to an online community, one where they connect with like-minded people, and they'll talk about whether the brand is to blame and whether they should be punished. And so it's, I think it's very important these days that we're no longer looking at, the brand and the consumer in isolation. We've got all these other dynamics where negative news can spread like wildfire.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And I also feel like recently I'm keen to get your thoughts. Are we seeing a shift? You talk about ethical kind of elements of the brand. And I don't know what your take is on this, where I feel like there are some shifts in terms of where brands sit with certain issues. So, for example, I feel like previously there was a very strong kind of social justice or elements of social good, where one of the things that I'm starting to see is that some brands are stepping away from that. Is that a trend that you're seeing? I'm very keen to get your thoughts on this.
That's right. And so you are seeing this, and it's an interesting trend in terms of the way in which brands are responding. But I think at the same time, they're also those that are listening to their consumers, are taking a lot of the perspectives into account and as they're making these shifts. So it's not necessarily they're deciding, right, this is the way we're going to do it in isolation. They're very much looking at the wider perspective of all their different stakeholders. Yeah.
I'd love if you could share an example of a brand that handled the crisis really well. Does anything come to mind?
One of the things that I notice, fast food brands, and in particular, I really love the way KFC, handle. Well, there's one in particular that springs to mind. They had a crisis back, it was a few years ago now, and it related to getting chicken into their stores. And it wasn't actually their fault. It was, they changed logistics providers and everything had gone pear-shaped. But instead of saying, oh, well, it's not our fault, we're the poor people that are trying to get chicken out to you, but we can't because we've got this terrible logistics provider that's not doing the right thing, they handled it completely differently. And what they did is they said, well, they took accountability. They said, it's our mistake. They were completely transparent about what was going on. And they also took to social media and engaged with customers. And in doing this, they humanized the brand, and they added they added humor to it. So people's anger sort of changed a bit. But I think that approach, or being that interaction, that speed in which in response, and that transparency, they're really vital ingredients so that you still keep consumer trust at the end of this. There's nothing worse than when a crisis happens and you're trying to get answers and there's nothing. It's deadpan silence. So, sort of running away from a crisis is not the best thing to do. And particularly given the prevalence of crises happening, it's not if, but when a crisis will occur.
Julia, what is your thought from what is happening in the U.S.? I mean, you look in the U.S., and one of the things that I feel about brand is, especially with the current election, it's made me think about, the brand of some of the, for example, big tech companies. I was thinking, for example, Amazon, very, very, and the founder even, Bezos, very anti-Trump. And then, it kind of, a lot of the tech companies turn and they're in the inauguration, donating money. What do you think something like that has an impact on brand image? Do you consider that as a crisis? I mean, how do you take that?
Yeah, I think it's been very, very interesting, this shift and very, very rapid shift. It can potentially, turn into a crisis if there is question over the morals, an ethical crisis I'm talking about, if there are questions, over the values that the brand is holding and the moral stance. So, if consumers believe that, it's not in line with their moral norms and it's outside of that, then certainly there's question, they start to question. So it really is this whole dynamic that consumers won't necessarily have made up their mind. They've seen the shift, but then together on social media or together with other consumers or other people around the place, they'll be connecting, swapping opinions, swapping perspectives in terms of whether there is, in their view, a violation of norms. And some will agree and some won't, but it has been a very, very interesting and very rapid shift.
This online community concept that you bring up is very interesting because you talk about, it seems like you would see something that you're like, I don't know if this is right. And then you go into the online communities and that's where your opinion starts to take shape. Is that right?
Yeah, that is so right. It's fascinating. It's a social influence of communities. And I think what's interesting about it is that, a brand community, there'll be, you'll have different pieces of information on it. And however, people will have a level of trust for that, but they really do trust those who have a like-minded interest. So
Mm.
they go to places where they think, well, these people think like me. I'm interested to see what their take is on the situation.
Yeah. I mean, and I would say, I would imagine if somebody, the organization who has the most influence on the community would most likely win. I'm thinking of, for example, the instance between Zoom and Microsoft, where Microsoft, I mean, now it's very clear. It wasn't clear back then, but Microsoft had this massive campaign of Zoom is not secure. You shouldn't be on Zoom. Where later on it turned out to be it was a massive Microsoft push to really push people away, and which worked. I feel like it would, their brand became, that was attached to the brand, where you're not secure enough for me. And when you say this, I kind of think about, well, whoever can control the community can to some degree control the narrative, and therefore the
Yes.
impact that could have on brands. Is that what do you think about that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think so. If you think about, or even leading up to a crisis, if you're a brand that has, so you identify those communities online that have an interest in your brand. And if you are there as a member of that community and you're there right through, you are seen as one of the members potentially, so that when a crisis occurs, you've got much more of a buffer. So if you're in there and you're part of it, and then something happens, then the consumers may be much more forgiving than if you are outside of it. You're the outsider. So there's a lot of time spent from brands and in brand communities, and rightly so. But there's also this other opportunity to help the brand by being part, and as you say, certainly with the narrative and how it plays out.
Julia, can you give me an example of a company that didn't manage a brand crisis very well?
Yeah, I think with some of the recent data breaches in Australia, there were some brands that I know they'd be sitting there saying, "Yeah, we could have done that a bit better." And I think some of the key learnings are really that really quick response and transparency, and it's a real tightrope, because you're sitting there saying, well, we don't want to alarm consumers, we don't want to lead them up the garden path, we don't want to cause people stress where we don't need to, but at the same time, if you're not proactive, you end up in an awful situation, because you've got to be reactive, and being reactive where you've got not just the media now, you've got all the consumers as well. This whole another dynamic. It becomes an absolute challenge. So I do think some of the breaches and the way they were handled could, I think people are now saying, yeah, okay, next time we'll handle it this way.
We touched on communities being very important, but maybe a little bit more holistically, where does marketing come in for a crisis management?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Marketing plays a really key role in crisis management, and alongside the PR department, if you have a PR department, but often it's marketing doing the PR as well. What I've noticed and observed in recent years is this tendency or this emphasis on, okay, marketing needs to generate leads for the sales team. And so in a way has become very much like a sales enablement function. And generating leads, don't get me wrong, is incredibly important. And particularly in this economic environment, the leads need to be coming through. But at the same time, investment in the brand is absolutely critical for the future success of the business. If the brand reputation is damaged, then it's much harder to generate leads. So the two need to happen at the same time, with a really strong emphasis on the brand and making sure that there is that time and investment into the brand.
If somebody doesn't have the budget. I'm a medium-sized organization. I don't have the budget that the large organizations have when it comes to building the brand. And now I have potentially a crisis on my hand. First of all, I think I keen to get your thoughts on this. I don't think small and medium businesses really have a crisis on their hand. I feel like it's really the big cats that get a kind of target painted on them, rightly or wrongly. I mean it's a different topic, but I feel like it's usually the larger brands that cop it from that angle. Would you say that's what do you think about that? Is that correct, or do you see even small brands suffering from this?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is the larger brands, because it's all that they, as you get larger, you become more and more well known, and so if something happens, then the magnitude seems to grow and grow and grow. And particularly for international brands, before you know it, it's all around the globe. But I do think that small and medium businesses do need to be across this as well, so that they are in the same way making sure, the same principles in a way apply. And, even if they don't have a big budget, just being in touch, being if you are managing your social media channels, it's part of that. It's part of that piece. And it's part of the also being prepared for any eventuality, that might happen to the business. So I don't think being an SME gives you a leave card for it. I think it's just as important. You may not have the big spans or the budgets, but I think it's still important that you're doing it within your budget. So, you are monitoring these communities, you are engaging with your customers, and if something does happen, you quickly respond. And I mean, you take at the moment in the market, and I certainly have noticed this a lot, there are an enormous amount of product recalls going through. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a large corporation. There's a lot of small entities, I'm saying, with this product is faulty, it needs to be out. That needs to be managed, because if it's not, if the marketer isn't managing that is a crisis. If the marketer isn't managing that, then certainly business will dry up. So there is certainly a need for all businesses at no matter what size to have their eye on this as much as possible.
Let's take the hypothetical situation where I'm a marketer. I don't have a big budget. I haven't been investing on brand too much. We've been doing a little bit, writing some blogs and participating in some communities and running some advertising and all that stuff, but I don't have a massive budget. And now I have a brand crisis on my hand. What should I do?
Okay, I think the first part of it is to get your response out to your customers to what's going on, and also into communities. But, prepare it internally first, so that you've got all your key people together in terms of that preparation of exactly what's happening. Keep your customers informed through the different channels. So the channels you use, even if, because you'll be sending it as it is, EDMs, you'll be managing your social media. You will know the communities where they have a high propensity to talk about your brand. So those are the channels that you're looking at. You've got to get the information out quickly, and you need to engage with the dialogue that happens with your customers, because they'll have questions, and when they have questions, it's not a good time to be hiding. It's your great opportunity to be responding to them, and to also then have follow up afterwards. I think that all of those things I've described can be pretty much done for free within an organization. It's just about sitting down and getting a good handle quickly on what the crisis is, and then preparing the response to it. Another really important piece of this is it's very useful to have a clear idea of all the different scenarios that may potentially happen before they do. And this is what a lot of companies do, is that you have everything, you brainstorm everything that could potentially happen. And then you draft out, okay, that if this happens, this is what this is what our response will be. Now, naturally, those are tailored at the time too, but it means that you're able to really go out and respond quickly and give customers the information that they need in order for them to make decisions.
Julia, I'm also interested, you know how we talked about Microsoft and Zoom. I'm also interested to hear your thoughts about maybe, I'm trying to think of what's the right term, but it's an externally induced brand crisis. And that, I'm thinking again, Zoom example, where a competitor had Microsoft, it's like a Death Star, right? It's just such deep pockets, and ability to, it kind of goes borderline propaganda to kind of create these perceptions for competition, so on and so forth. Have you seen examples of that being a tactics or something that organizations use?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't seen a lot of it, so that is so outward. I think it's brands do try and avoid that as much as possible, because sometimes as an industry you need each other. But it's interesting. I have seen more where you've had a spillover effect of, it's gone from one brand that completely wasn't at fault, but it's tarred the whole industry. So I think that's something that we need to be cognizant of as well. So, dirty tactics with brands in your industry, it's certainly, it does happen, you're right, but brands need to be careful, because you do need each other when the whole industry is tarred. So and again, in responding to that, you can't say, oh, well, it's fall in a heap. They did this to me, and fall in the chair and say, well, it's not our fault and we're not to blame, and so on. I think that there are lessons learned from a situation like the KFC one, where they sat there and said, okay, we own this. We're stuck with this. Now let's move and do something about it.
I love it. Julia, I do want to ask you some rapid fire questions, but before I get there, are there any other steps or any other preventive measurements that organizations can kind of take when it comes to brand crisis? You talked about preparing in advance and being ready if something like this happens. Does anything else come to mind that, if I'm a marketer now listening, I'm like, oh, I need to really think about if we have, something blow up, what we're going to do. Are there any other tactics or things that I need to think about as a marketer to be prepared to basically expect the unexpected?
Yeah, the advice I would give is get on the front foot, because if you don't get on the front foot and have all of this at top of your mind, then it's gonna it hurts. So get on the front foot, do your brainstorming, get your different scenarios in place, and then start planning from there. And so that when there's nothing worse than having a shock of a crisis. The other thing is that I would say is bring all your other stakeholders in early.
What if I have stakeholders that I bring this up and they're like, oh my goodness, what are you talking about? There's no issue. We have more urgent issues that we got to deal with. How do I convince them that this is important?
Yeah, and I think the important piece is have your CEO on board. And if people aren't on board, certainly they can have a quiet word to them, because crises and business continuity are about the whole organisation. So, everyone does need to be on board. So I think, if people aren't responding, I think it's important to ensure that the importance is pointed out to them, and be it your CEO or other members of the executive team. It's absolutely critical.
Got it. Okay. Julia, I got some rapid fire questions. You ready to dive into those?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. First question I have is, what is one resource? This could be a book, a blog, a podcast that has had a pretty profound impact in the way that you either work, you live, but something that really stands out for you that you maybe come across in the past 3 to 6 months.
Oh, this one's a little bit of an oldie, but it's a goodie. There's a book Peter Bregman put out, which is 18 minutes. It wasn't necessarily in the last 6 months, but it was some time back. But it's really about focusing on the things that matter, the important things. It's worth a read. I found it really sort of changed my approach because, naturally in a day you've got all these different things going on, but it really helped to say, okay, what are the really, really important ones?
Love it. If you could give one advice to B2B marketers, what would it be?
I would say now embrace AI. AI is really incredible in terms of what it brings to the table. But at the same time, I think we've all got to remember the richness of the human element. So I think we need to AI is a tool, but know that what we have and what we can bring is super important. So don't lose those skills. Hone those skills as well because they're vital.
Julia, who are some of the influencers or thought leaders or people of strong opinion that you follow and you keep track of?
One of them is Greg Kihlstrom. Really like Greg's stuff, and also Seth Godin, who has been around a wee while now, but certainly worth listening. I always make sure that I've got an ear out every time he speaks.
Yeah, that's very true. Both of them are great thought leaders. Last one, what's something that excites you about B2B today?
What I really love about B2B today in particular is the opportunity to innovate and disrupt and be different. There is so much opportunity. And if you look at every industry, there's, you can sort of turn it up on its head and do something different. So I love that. Today, living in today is very exciting.
Julia, this has been an awesome conversation. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and thank you for all these insights. I've taken a bunch of notes, a couple of things I'm going to be checking out. But thanks so much for being a guest.
Thanks so much, Shahan.
Today's episode of Growth Colony was produced by Liza Maywald and Alexander Hipwell. It was edited by Dave Samito with additional editing by Liza Maywald and music arrangement by Liza and Alexander. Special thanks to Tina Wabe. We couldn't make this show without you. This episode was hosted by Shaheen Hoda, Director of Growth at Xgrowth. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to know more about Growth Colony, check out our newsletter and subscribe with the link in the pod description. Do you think you'd be a great guest or just interested in a chat? Send through an email at podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's podcast@xgrowth.com.au. Or fill out the form in the description. That's all for now. We'll catch you next week right here on Growth Colony.